Okay, good morning or afternoon or evening, depending on the time of the day you're watching this video. Let me especially thank Mr. Kinsley for giving me the opportunity to address this great audience. I don't take him for granted. He's been a phenomenal leader, making a difference in this space, speaking to young people, to older people, to parents, to schools, and to teachers. Thank you, bro Kinsley, for what you're doing. And I'm always proud of you. And I also want to thank you for being here because you're watching and you are devoting time to do this. And I really appreciate you for your time. I have a short time to just speak very briefly about the questions about creativity. And my whole goal is for me to expand the concept of creativity and ensure that we are not defining creativity in such a way that is not inclusive enough. Now, if you know me, you know I like to tell stories. I'm going to start with a story. And it was something I observed about one organization that did a talent hunt. They wanted to do a creativity contest back then in Nigeria. And I watched the final, and the winner of the competition was somebody who came and sang. The person was very good, sang. The second person in the competition was a poet. He did what they call spoken word, as in it was like a poet or oratory. The third person also sang, so it was a singer, a poet, and a singer that came for second and third. And I started to think about that result. And so I spoke to one of the organizers there and I said, congratulations for what you're doing. I really thank them because they were helping young people to discover themselves and to become better. And I just said, can we have a dialogue? I'm trying to paraphrase this conversation. I mean, it wasn't as if I recorded it when I said it. And I said, can we have a conversation? And he said, yeah. I said, did you notice that the first, second, and third winners were singers and poets? He said, yes. I said, are you concerned about that? He said, no. I mean, they were the best. And I said, well, I agree they may be the best. I said, but do you, if we look, you're trying to get creative people. He said, yes. You're trying to get people that had smartness, intelligence, and had talent. He said, yes. I said, are you aware of do you know about the 9 dimensions of intelligences? He said, what is the 9 times? I said, so there is a study that was done by Howard that mentioned there are 9 different types of intelligences, and that people can be creative, people can demonstrate talent in those 9 areas. Say, oh, wow. I said, so, but what we have done is that the winners of this competition have only come from one domain. So people can be creative, people can be talented, people can be skillful in 9 domains, but the winners of this competition came from one or maybe 2 domains. He said, wow, that's surprising. I said, yes, that's what has happened. And then he said, so why do I think so? I said, it's because of your judges. I said, your judges, you have 3 judges, you have a panel of 3 judges. There were 2 singers and 1 actor. I said, so your judges came from one side, also one domain. I said, the curious thing is that those judges selected people from their domain to be the best. I said, because, in science, it's been found what is called affinity bias. And what is affinity bias? That's a tendency for you to be attracted to connect with people that look like you or talk like you or have similar skills like you. I said, so what has happened is that you have created a panel of judges that saw through the prism of the creative arts and they use it to determine who are the best. And the person said, oh, I didn't know. So I said, what do you think we should do differently? I said, first thing is that you must first go and read about the 9 intelligences, right? And then select a panel that reflects those 9 and help the panel understand your goal is to look for creativity. And say, oh, that, I mean, then I will conclude. And then I just asked the person, and then I just said, you remember the first thing that was told was about God in Genesis chapter 1? He said, yeah. He said, in the beginning, God created. Yeah, he said, yeah. I said, so when the Bible said God created, did God sing? He said, no. Did God act drama? He said, no. I said, so why are you now making those children feel it's singers and speakers that are creative? Remember, the frame of reference you were using for this competition, because it was a religious institution, was that God is creative, therefore they should be creative. Now, when the Bible talks about God being creative, it wasn't making things, it wasn't singing, it wasn't reading a poem. So why are you changing that concept of creativity in the heart of these young people? And they said, yeah, they understood, and I believe they improved that. Now, what are the lessons I want to bring for that? Number one, we seems to think there is an affinity between creativity, talent, and the creative arts. Actually, we actually call it the creative arts. Like there is no creative science. So we say the person is a creative art or performing art. So we seem to believe that it is when you are creative or people that are in the art that dance that are the creative ones. Number one. Number two, we seem to believe that there's no need for creativity or innovation in the sciences. We seem to believe that. Then, to now, based on those two cardinal beliefs that the arts are could be creative, the sciences are not creative, we have now developed structures and institutions to reinforce it. So, for example, when we do talent hunts, we typically put musicians and actors to be judges. Of course, they'll select people like them. Those are the institutions we are building in our universities. We have what they call creative arts department. There's no creative science department because we are building institutions to reinforce that perception that art is what is creative. Nigeria, the minute the president has appointed cabinet minister in Nigeria, and he has created a ministry of the creative economy. I checked their strategy document. Quite a lot of their stuff were in the performance group because the general perception is that, hey, it's when you can dance and when you can do this. Of course, I saw one or two lines that talked about creating software, but the dominant thing was the performance. Of course, part of it is also how we name subjects in secondary school or high school. So we have a subject called fine arts, but then we have a subject called technical drawing. Is that not interesting? Fine arts and technical drawing are both drawing. But we said this one is fine arts. But this one is technical drawing. The two subjects draw on the general note. Of course, fine arts could be building and all of that. Of course, you could also be asked to do models in technical drawing. But we have said this one is a fine art. That one is just a technical drawing. So when this child loves things that are fine or has that expression where he wants to perhaps express his creativity in a way that fits the art, we'll tell him to go and do fine art. But if the guy wants to become an engineer or wants to become an architect, we ask the guy to go and do technical drawing. Now, what the guy realizes is that when he graduates and he becomes an architect and he wants to design the building for GT Bank is not going to give him that contract because he can draw boxes. Because technical drawing seems to assume that you must be able to draw straight lines. That guy will get to architecture school and realize that they're going to teach him about form versus function. Form follows function. He's going to realize that form is both a science and the art. He's going to realize that when he does anything, part of what he's going to be graded for in architecture school is the aesthetics of the house. I'm not going to pay that guy if I ask him to build him a house if he just draws lines from me. I want a house that looks beautiful. I gave the example of GT Bank because, they have some of the most imposing and beautiful structures in Nigeria. That guy is suddenly going to realize that, hey, this technical drawing requires fine arts in real life. Or let me give another example. This guy graduates and goes to work for Tesla or goes to work for Honda. You remember when Honda used to release new Honda Accord cars in the 80s and early 90s? So when they bring Honda Accord 1992 model, what happens? They don't change anything to the engineering. They only change the lights and they change the design of the grid and they change the shape of the car. Then in next year, they change something. All of those changes, is it art or science? Because it's both. Because the cars needs to still fulfill the laws of aerodynamics so that it can move quickly. The car also needs to be efficient where it doesn't consume too much fuel. But the car also needs to be beautiful. That is why, for example, if you check the dashboard of a Honda car versus a Toyota car, you will see that the Honda is similarly more beautiful than the Toyota car because you realize that even in doing the design of a car, you need fine art. So we realize that in real terms, the sciences is not negating the creativity. All the elements found in the periodic table, if you remember the periodic table for those that did chemistry or physics, all the elements were found through the process of creativity. Somebody was creative, somebody was inquiring, somebody was thinking about how do we get this out, and was able to get that out at the end of the day. So creativity is the ability of a human being to have sequence of thoughts and actions that produce something that knowledgeable people in that domain will see as appropriate in a certain concept. I'm trying to use the definition from the framework that was developed by the OECD. So creativity is about somebody who has a sequence of thoughts and is able to take actions to produce something. So, for example, if you go back to Genesis chapter 1, the Bible says the Spirit of the Lord was hovering. It looks to me that that was the sequence of thought and thinking. And if you see how God went about the process of creation, there was thought behind it. So, for example, there was the land. He created the land before he created the plants. Why? The plants need the land. So there was a sequence in the creation. Creation was not haphazard. There was a science behind it. So God created land before he created plants. Then he created animals because the animals need to eat the plants. Then he created human beings who were supposed to use everything. So there was a sequence of thought. There was a pattern. It wasn't just an haphazard way. So that is what creativity. And in a nutshell, it seems that we can say creativity happens in 4 stages or through a 4-stage process. 1, there's inquiry. The person asks questions about something. He ponders about it. He asks questions. Number 2, the person imagines alternatives. He starts to imagine based on the question he has asked. And number 3, the person does something. He demonstrates it. He creates something. He produces something. And finally, the person reflects or does a look back. And if you allow me to use Genesis chapter 1 to also show that creative process, I said the first stage is inquiry. So if you look at how the Bible describes it, it said the Spirit of the Lord was hovering around. It seems to me it was like an inquiry process, a review process. The person is wondering, there is a problem, there is chaos, there is problem with this art. Everything is dark and tumble and everything was bad. There was an inquiry around, this thing is not supposed to be like this. There's supposed to be a solution. Oh, there's a problem with the health sector in Nigeria. That inquiry, I'm bothered about it. That is the first stage. Now, the second stage is imagining. And if you check Genesis chapter 1, there was, for God to go through that process, he must have imagined it. Thought he said, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And you know, when he was going to create man, he said something, let us create man. So there was like a thought, a thinking, an imagination that made him realize that I can do something about the situation. So when you are finished making inquiries about your concerns about the education or health sector or things about the sciences, for example, we got to imagine it. Number 3, you have to do something. And so God said, let there be light, and there was light. He did something. So many of us, we do the inquiry because we are bothered. We can see that this thing is not working well. We imagine a solution, but then we don't create, we don't produce. And then finally, we reflect. You know, the Bible says, after, and then the first, and God looked at what he said, and he said it was good. Day 2, and God looked at what he said, and he said it was good. Then on the last, after all, he said, and God looked at what he did and saw it was very good. So in Genesis chapter 1, we see those 4 stages or process of creativity: inquiry, imagining, doing, and reflecting. So as I close, because my time is almost up, what should we do as parents, as teachers, as school owners to reinforce those 4 models? Number 1, we must make students and young people know how to inquire. We must encourage them to inquire. They must have that sense of asking questions. We must not stop them when they ask questions. We must not say they're asking too many questions. We must allow them to probe. We must test them in exams that makes them ask questions. Part of that asking question is the ability to say, this thing is not supposed to be this way. I remember when I was in the university, I was taught about the 14 principles of management as proposed by Henry Fayol. And you know, after I was taught by this very brilliant professor about the 14 principles of management, I remember I raised my hand. I said, sir, you said there are 14 principles. He said, yes. I said, so can I ask a question? I said, what if one of us discovers the 15th principle or the 16th principle? And then the man said, no, there are only 14 principles. And Henry Fayol has discovered it. That man stopped us from inquiry, because he said it's ended, it's done, it's done. One of my most favorite authors, John Maxwell, wrote about the 21 irrefutable laws of leadership. Then he wrote again and wrote that it seems like it's true. Inquiry is asking questions. We must help people to know how to ask questions, particularly young people. Whether they want to go to the arts or they want to go to science, they need inquiry to be creative. Number two, we need to help them to imagine. One of the best ways that young people, very young people, imagine is through storytelling. So one, we must tell them stories, and we must ask them to tell us stories. So we should not tell them they're liars if they tell a story that looks outrageous. So you ask a 3 or 4-year-old boy to tell you a story, and in that one story there is Mickey Mouse, and there is God, and there is Jesus, and there is Angel, and there is Amitabh Bachchan, and there is Shakira, and there is Beyonce in one single story. That is part of the result. That's part of that came from his imagination. Allow the child to imagine. Part of what helps imagination is for us to start to teach subjects in a broad way. So, for example, you are teaching a child rainfall in geography. Help the guy to link it with science, right? Help him to link it with agriculture. That imagination process we need to do. Number three is, what can we start to do to make the child produce things? So this child has thought about the problem, has inquired, has imagined. So we can ask him to produce something. Now, the production could just be that we ask him to do a presentation to us in the house. So we watch a film, right? We'll watch a film. I don't know which is the reigning film now. Barbie? I don't know. And then after the film, we ask the child, what do you think about this film? That's inquiry. Then we tell the child, think about it. At the point when Barbie went to this place and this ABC, can you think about alternatives if Barbie didn't do that? Imagining. Then finally you can tell the child, okay, so act like Barbie for me. You are helping the child to produce based on his inquiry, based on his imagination, and based on his the combination of two. So the production can be, we can tell him to make a presentation, we can tell him to draw Barbie, we can ask him to sing about Barbie, we can ask him to do anything about Barbie, and finally, after he does it, we should ask him, hey, how did it go? Did you think that looks like Barbie? Does that represent Barbie? Now, we're doing all of that because we are developing that capacity of that child. Now, that child needs all this for whether he wants to be a science student or whether he wants to be an art student. The reason why many people don't do sciences is because they can't go through this process with physics, chemistry, and biology. So, when I was in secondary school, I had a senior who refused to do the science. He said he was going to do the arts. And I remember we asked him, so why are you not going to do sciences? He said, because he doesn't understand what you guys do in sciences. He said, so when he was in Form 3, in those days, in Form 3, you do science and arts. They asked him, a car was moving at a particular speed and all of that. And they asked him to calculate the speed. And he said, he was wondering, where is the car? Which car? I can't see the car. He couldn't imagine the car. Do you know the funniest thing? This guy left and went to do the art. But you know the funniest thing? In that art, we also have to imagine. But you see, the teacher that was teaching about physics was not giving him the ability, was not helping him to understand. He needed to use his imagination to understand science. So he went elsewhere, where he went to use the same imagination to do what he said he couldn't do. Oh, do you think that when Chinua Achebe wrote the book, all the great books he wrote, or when Wole Soyinka wrote all the great books he wrote, or when all those great authors and film writers, Kemi Adetiba and co, do you think what they were doing, producing something like King of Boys, or the Lion and the Jewel, or the Harrow of God, or the Man of the People, all those books, they came because when they made inquiries, they came as a result of the fact that they imagined. They came as a result of the fact they did something and they reflected on it. Or do you think when Archimedes discovered the Iroka principles in it that we use today in thermodynamics, how did it happen? There was inquiry. Or when Newton discovered gravity, realized that started to do the science around gravity. Science history tells us that he sat under a tree and an apple fell. Then he started to think about it, right? He started to make inquiries. He started to imagine. Then he produced formulas. When Einstein came and created the great formula that made a difference in the world, E equals to MC squared. It didn't come because he was only brilliant. It came because he made inquiries. It came because he imagined solution and he created a formula. And that formula still works today. Every child must be trained to develop those four competences. Every child, whether that child is going to be an actor, or is going to be a dancer, or is going to be a scientist, or is going to be a geologist, or is going to be a medical doctor, or is going to be a lawyer. When that medical doctor gets into that room and has to do a surgery, he's going to have to make inquiries. When he sees the patient, oh, how are you? How are you feeling? What has been your temperature? Have you been using the restroom? I know those are inquiry. That's what he's doing, right? It's part of what is called the scientific method. Then he has to imagine. So if the person said he has fever and he's not been eating and he's not feeling this way, could it be that he has malaria? Then, he goes ahead and says, okay, let me make more inquiries. Go to the lab and go and do a medical test. Then he goes to the lab and sees the lab result. And then he puts it together. The guy has a temperature. The lab test shows that there is an increase in one of his cells, which shows an infection. Then the guy imagines something and said, this guy has an infection. Based on my inquiry through question, based on my inquiry through the lab, this guy has an infection. He puts it in his mind. And then he now writes for you a prescription, which is a product. That prescription is giving you is what is doing. Third stage is writing you a prescription, which is now what it now tells you. Take it after 3 days. If your temperature does not go down, come back and let's do a review. He's doing the fourth stage. That is a doctor using the 4 stages and the 4 competencies to create. So whether your child wants to be a lawyer or a doctor, an accountant, or an engineer, you've got to teach him those 4 things. And anywhere he decides to go in life, whether to go to the sciences or go to the arts, he will need those 4 skills to be creative. Thank you very much. Remember, number 1, inquire. We got to teach children to learn how to make good inquiries. Number 2, we got to teach children how to imagine well. Deep imagination, great imagination, wild imagination. Number 3, we got to make them produce something. It's unfortunate somebody will tell you he's doing alternatives to practical in chemistry. What does that mean? If you can't do titration and you don't mix those things, how are you going to do alternative to practical? How can there be alternative to practical in agriculture? Why should that guy not have interaction with equipment that is going to produce food? Why is that alternative to practical? There's got to be production. There's got to be the doing that is the result of the thinking, the inquiry, and the imagination, and there's got to be look back. When we do that, we're going to raise creative kids, whether they do the sciences or they do the arts. Thank you very much. I do not take it for granted. I really appreciate it. I hope you learned one thing. Thank you.